It's my last video about World War One, and in this video I'm talking about the effects of the war and the aftermath of the war. I'll begin by talking about the Spanish flu. This is known as the Spanish flu. It has nothing to do with Spain. That's a propaganda name that was given to it. It actually emerges in the United States and is spread to Europe by American soldiers. And after the war, it spreads across the globe as soldiers return home. And in the course of about a year, somewhere between 50 and 100 million people died. It's one of the greatest natural disasters, one of the greatest disasters at all in history. It seems to be, about it. It's more destructive. More people die as a result of this disease than died in World War One or later on, potentially, in World War Two. So that's a significant effect that comes out of World War One. That dissemination of this disease across the world is made possible as a result of World War One. And great change that happens in American life that's made possible by World War One is the passage of the 19th Amendment. Passage of the 19th Amendment that grants women the right to vote. This was an amendment that had been lobbied by activists for women's rights for some time before this point. But the federal government generally restricted female voting in federal elections and had left women's elections up to the states. However, with World War One, you have more women involved in public life because they're working, they're contributing to society independently of the men that they are married to or who are their fathers. And so it's more and more recognized that women are going to be granted the vote to serve as autonomous electors in their own right. It's also the case that once during the war, women start to strike for the right to vote. They've become such an important part of the economy that Wilson even says this is the price to pay for winning the war. If women go on strike, it's going to be difficult for the US economy to maintain the level of production that it needs, and therefore that he is going to reluctantly support the passage of the 19th Amendment. So this is a major change to American political and social life, the granting of women the right to vote across the United States in federal elections. After the war, we see a period of economic turbulence. So there had been price controls, maximum prices leveled on products by the federal government during the war. Those are lifted after the war, and so prices rise. At the same time, you have the demilitarization of the American army. Soldiers are coming home, wanting to return to their jobs. This leads to growing unemployment. So prices are rising, unemployment is growing, and so you have, it doesn't last very long, but you have this period of economic turbulence. It's felt especially by African Americans who, if you remember, move into the cities as part of the Great Migration around the time of World War One. Northern cities that are not used to large African American populations. We see resentment of a sense that African Americans are taking the jobs of soldiers who went away to work or people who are now coming of age. And so we have a number of serious race riots, especially in Chicago. Chicago is where we have the most destructive race riot. There are lynchings that are carried out even of African American veterans. And so you have a wave of racial violence that's in some ways connected to racism, but in some ways connected to this economic turbulence and readjustment after the war, the way that society has changed as a result of the war. This racialized violence contributes to the radicalization of some African Americans. Not all African Americans by any means, but we do start to see from this point that there is a body of African Americans who are promoting civil rights and civil liberties, who increasingly start to see the way forward as more violent agitation, more of a method of W.E.B. Du Bois, unrest and agitation, and kind of a sense of despair that it will be possible to achieve a full integration through peaceful measures. So there's a radicalization of the civil rights movement among African Americans. Again, not in huge numbers, but the seeds are there, at the same time as we see a renewed manifestation of racist a racist backlash or racist suppression of African Americans particularly in northern cities, but still in the American South as well. This period of economic turbulence leads to strikes across the United States. This labor unrest leads to what's known as the First Red Scare, fears of a communist revolution in the United States. Remember, the communist revolution in Russia began with a workers' revolution. Every time there's a strike, there's a fear within the United States that the same thing is going to happen there. This Red Scare is augmented by attacks from anarchists. There are around 40 homemade bombs that are discovered in mail packages in the United States in 1919, 1920. And so this leads to fears of conspiracies to overthrow the United States government. It leads to, again, increased government control and enforcement and surveillance during this period. So this is the period of turbulence, change, readjustment that takes place after the war. What are the broader consequences of World War I? Firstly, that Europe has been devastated. The population has been devastated. For example, it's very difficult now for women who are coming of age at this time to find a husband who's not been crippled or doesn't exist anymore because he's been killed in the war. So there's a population imbalance. The economy has been devastated. Many of those who've been fighting in the war are no longer able to work to support themselves. And so Europe has been devastated in these material ways. It's also been devastated culturally. Throughout the 19th century, there's this dream of the Enlightenment, that Enlightenment philosophy, if pursued, is just going to lead to greater and greater progress on the part of the human race. And evidence for this are the amazing technological and scientific achievements that are occurring during the 19th century. But what European society discovers as the 20th century begins is that this society that's supposed to be the result of all this progress can carry out this incredibly destructive war, the most destructive war in history. And so there's a loss of confidence in the Enlightenment ideal. There's this discovery that these technological innovations are actually not making human life better. They're making war more destructive. More people are dying, more people are being crippled. And so this leads to a turning away or a loss of confidence in the Enlightenment dream. It opens the door to more materialist approaches to life, including the spread of Marxist philosophy. This is the broad effects of World War I in Europe. In the United States, we see a slightly different reaction. The United States is more confident as a result of World War I. It hasn't known the long periods of trench warfare and the devastation of its population. It's known mostly success and victory on a broader scale than it's ever achieved before. And so the United States is more confident. It's more confident that it is called to play the role of a leader and a superpower in the world. This is the idea of manifest destiny applied to the whole world rather than just to North America, increasingly to the whole world, probably not immediately in 1918. But the truth is that World War I does set the stage for the United States, advances the stage even further from early American imperialism in the Pacific to establish the United States as a leader on a global stage.